Henry VIII has become well known for his unending appetite for marriage, securing 6 wives in total, 2 of whom were killed by the executioner's blade, and for his monumental break with Rome. The refusal of Pope Clement VII to grant Henry's request to have his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled precipitated the English Reformation and the eventual separation of the Church of England from papal authority. However, despite his cataclysmic reign, Henry was never destined to become king. In fact, Henry's older brother Arthur's lifelong status as Britain's heir seemed certain, and even Henry's sisters were better prepared for royal glory, albeit as devoted wives. Here are the little-known fates of Henry VIII's siblings. And this is Crown Undone. The first son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, Arthur, was born on the 19th of September 1486 and was named after the legendary King Arthur, the mythic post-Roman Briton believed to have led battles against the Anglo-Saxons at the turn of the 6th century. The wedding of Henry and Elizabeth in 1486 marked a crucial settlement in the conflict between the Lancastrian and Yorkist factions, which had become embroiled in the English Wars of the Roses for 30 years. Before launching an invasion from France, the Lancastrian Henry Tudor promised to marry the eldest daughter of the former Yorkist King Edward IV. Henry landed in Wales and advanced towards London, where, en route, he fought and slayed the reigning but disputed Yorkist King Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field on the 22nd of August 1485. As the heir to the recently established dynasty, Arthur was viewed as the great hope of the House of Tudor. Arthur became Duke of Cornwall at birth and was created Prince of Wales and Earl of Chester when he turned 3. 2 years later, once he began his formal studies, Arthur was made a Knight of the Garter, the most distinguished order of knighthood founded by Edward III in 1348. Arthur's education concentrated on grammar, poetry, history, rhetoric, and ethics, and he was recorded as a star student under the blind French poet and Augustinian friar Bernard André, who said that the Prince of Wales had read and memorized large swathes of Homer, Virgil, Ovid, and Cicero. Arthur was unusually tall for his age, and his ginger hair and high-bridged nose made him particularly handsome in the eyes of the royal courts across Europe. By 1501, Arthur was considered an unrivaled archer and a skilled dancer. His father had recently sent him to Ludlow Castle in the Welsh Marches, where he set up his own household and council. In an attempt to secure an alliance with the powerful Spain, which had recently been unified by Isabella I and Ferdinand II, Henry VII planned to marry his heir Arthur to the youngest daughter of the Spanish monarchs, Catherine of Aragon. The two had been officially betrothed in 1497 through a papal dispensation, since Arthur was below the age of consent. They were married by proxy in 1499 and then formally married in November 1501, when Catherine underwent the tempestuous voyage from Spain to England at just 15 years old. In a letter to Catherine in 1499, Henry wrote, quote, "I cannot tell you what an earnest desire I feel to see your highness. Let be hastened the love conceived between us, and the wished-for joys may reap their proper fruit." The night of their wedding, a bedding ceremony was arranged by Arthur's grandmother, Lady Margaret Beaufort, who had been instrumental in Henry VII's rise to power. The couple's bed was sprinkled with holy water and blessed by the Bishop of London. Catherine was undressed, veiled, and laid in the bed. Arthur was escorted by his gentlemen into the bedchamber, and the two were left alone. Soon, the English court was confidently awaiting the news that Catherine, now Princess of Wales, had fallen pregnant, and by spring the next year, a messenger did arrive from Ludlow. But the news that was brought totally blindsided the king. On the 4th of April 1502, Henry VII was told that his son and heir Arthur was dead. The marriage between Arthur and Catherine had lasted just 5 months before the 15-year-old prince died of what was thought to be the mysterious English sweating sickness. Arthur was buried on the 25th of April, and soon Spain and England agreed that Catherine be betrothed to the new heir, the future Henry VIII. On the night of the 28th of November 1489, Elizabeth of York was preparing to give birth to her second child. During her confinement, she had been attended by her mother-in-law, Margaret Beaufort, and the matriarch of the Tudor dynasty was there to witness the birth of her first granddaughter, who was named Margaret in her grandmother's honour. Margaret shared a close relationship with her grandmother. In fact, when the Spanish ambassador was sent by Isabella at the turn of the 16th century to broker a peace deal between England and Scotland, with the main task of securing a marriage between the 9-year-old Margaret and the 25-year-old Scottish King James IV, Lady Margaret vehemently refused. She insisted that the two wait, possibly after recalling her own traumatic experience of child rearing at such a young age. Henry VII was Margaret Beaufort's only son, and she fell pregnant at 12 and gave birth at just 13 years old, 3 months after her husband, Edmund Tudor, died from the plague. Heeding the refusal, the Spanish ambassador wrote to Isabella that, quote, "The daughter of Henry is in fact very young and very small for her years." Having obtained a papal dispensation for the marriage of his eldest daughter and the Scottish king, since they were distant cousins, the marriage treaty between Margaret and James was officially signed in 1501, and in January the following year, the Treaty of Peace was signed between England and Scotland, becoming the first peace agreement between the two kingdoms in over 170 years. It was said that once Henry realised that his sister Margaret would take precedence over him when she became Queen of Scotland, he wept with rage. Months before Margaret was set to leave England for Scotland, her mother, Elizabeth of York, died of a postpartum infection on the day of her 37th birthday. In just over 2 years, Henry VII had lost his eldest son, his wife, his newborn daughter, and now his eldest daughter would be moving to Scotland. They would never see each other again. From 1507 until 1514, Margaret and James had 6 children, but only one, the future King James V, survived infancy. Once Henry VII died of tuberculosis in April 1509 and Margaret's younger brother Henry VIII ascended the English throne, the peace treaty that had been formalised between England and Scotland upon Margaret's marriage was quickly deteriorating. As Henry VIII headed towards war with France, Scotland honoured its historic alliance with the French by invading England, and the subsequent Battle of Flodden on the 9th of September 1513 became the largest battle ever fought between the two kingdoms. James IV ended up being killed in the disastrous battle, becoming the last British monarch to die while fighting, and Margaret, at just 23, was confirmed by Parliament as the Regent of Scotland. During the future James V's minority, Margaret would regularly switch her allegiances between the pro-French and pro-English factions in Scotland, and in the summer of 1514 she'd secretly married the 6th Earl of Angus, Archibald Douglas. By remarrying after James's death, Margaret sacrificed her position as regent, and soon she was replaced by the pro-French Duke of Albany, John Stuart. However, the marriage soured quickly, and after Margaret returned to Scotland following a year-long stay in England for her own safety and the safety of her newborn daughter, Lady Margaret Douglas, she discovered that the Earl of Angus had been living with his former lover, Lady Jane Stuart. Margaret managed to obtain an annulment from Angus in 1527, and soon she married her third and final husband, Henry Stuart. Margaret's only living son, James, was pronounced king in his own right at just 12, but their relationship was turbulent, and she spent the rest of her life drifting in and out of her son's favour. Margaret eventually died on the 18th of October 1541 at 51 years old, most likely from complications following a stroke. The third child of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York was the future Henry VIII himself, who was born on the 28th of June 1491. Henry and Elizabeth's fourth child and second daughter Elizabeth was born on the 2nd of July 1492, but she died just 3 years later and was buried in Westminster Abbey in September 1495. A year after Elizabeth's death, Elizabeth of York gave birth to another daughter, Mary, who was born on the 18th of March 1496 at Sheen Palace. At just 6, the same year that her mother would die, Mary was given her own household with staff, a physician and a schoolmaster. She was taught French, Latin, music, embroidery and dance. Mary and her brother Henry were close as children, and in 1516, when Henry's first daughter was born, she was named Mary in honour of the king's sister. It's said that Mary was a great beauty in her youth, even catching the eye of Philip I of Castile when the 10-year-old Mary was tasked with entertaining the court's guests. When Philip died in December 1507, Mary was betrothed to his son Charles, later the powerful Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, but the union was called off in 1514. As marriages continued to act as some of the most effective peace treaties between hostile states, the English statesman and Cardinal Thomas Wolsey was tasked with arranging a marriage between France and England. In the end, it was agreed that the 18-year-old Mary Tudor would marry the 52-year-old Louis XII. Louis had been King of France since 1498, succeeding his second cousin once removed, Charles VIII, who had died without heirs. Naturally reluctant to accept the proposed marriage, Princess Mary convinced her brother that if she said yes to the French marriage, she would be allowed to independently choose her next husband, an agreement that would play out sooner than anyone expected. Less than 3 months after his marriage to Mary, Louis died from a severe episode of gout, with no legitimate sons. As Francis I ascended the French throne, he began plotting another marriage for the widowed Mary, but instead the English princess told her brother that if he didn't abide by her wishes that she would choose her next marriage, Mary threatened to join a nunnery. Eventually agreeing to Mary's demands, Henry sent the Duke of Suffolk, Charles Brandon, who Mary had already harboured romantic feelings for, to negotiate the princess's return. Although Brandon was forced to promise Henry and his Privy Council that he wouldn't propose to the Tudor princess, Mary was adamant that the two get married, and the couple was secretly wed in a Paris ceremony on the 3rd of March 1515, with just 10 guests in attendance, one of which was King Francis himself. Without Henry's approval, Brandon's decision to marry the king's sister was tantamount to treason, and it was only thanks to Henry's love for his sister Mary that Brandon was spared execution, though he was forced to pay a heavy fine. Mary and Brandon soon retired to country life in Suffolk, where she gave birth to 4 children, who she raised alongside Brandon's daughters from his second marriage. Mary and Brandon's first daughter, Frances Grey, born in July 1517, would later give birth to Lady Jane Grey, who was chosen by Henry VIII's son Edward VI to be his successor, and her contested reign lasted just 9 days before she was deposed by Mary I and executed the following year. Despite the close relationship between Mary and her brother Henry, the king's choice to pursue Anne Boleyn and attempt to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon marred the siblings' relationship. The same year that Anne Boleyn became the Queen of England, Mary was on her deathbed. She had been sick on and off for the past few years, having never fully recovered from a bout of the sweating sickness that she had caught in 1528. On the 25th of June 1533, Mary died at 37 years old. After the birth of Mary back in 1496, Henry VII and Elizabeth of York would have 2 more children, Edmund in 1499 and Catherine in 1503, but neither would live long. Henry VIII outlived all of his siblings, dying in 1547 at the age of 55. While Henry is by far the most well-known of his Tudor siblings, the fates of his other brother and 2 sisters were just as instrumental to European politics and diplomacy. From Spain to Scotland to France, the second generation of the Tudor dynasty carved out their respective places in early modern Europe. They were the little-known lives of Henry VIII's siblings, and this was Crown Undone.